Hello and good afternoon, everyone. All right. So today we have a class. It's a class about news of the world that's going on right now. It was requested by somebody in our group, and so I like to try to accommodate whenever that happens. And it is important that we know about it. It's something that is ongoing and not new, but it is something that's been ongoing in a way and also taking a different form. So what we're going over is kind of the situation in the Ukraine, and just kind of a background on it. So I found a piece that I think did well. I looked at a lot of different pieces on it, trying to find one that describes it without being completely political. I mean, it is a political thing, one way or the other, but kind of go over like what does it mean. So it's why the Ukraine matters and what to know about the crisis with Russia. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Russia is setting up troops around the borders of Ukraine and is saying that they're going to go in to the Ukraine. So and the Ukraine does not want this. The U.S. has said that we're going to help, and other countries have as well. Nothing as of yet has happened, and this is a little early for this week, so I mean, something might happen, and you'll have updated news. Because I'm not sending this out till, well, a couple of days from now. And I'm hoping that Vladimir Putin kind of decides that, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea. And that we don't get into a skirmish as much as we can. Because we don't want that. So, what to know about the crisis with Russia. So I'll kind of go over it and explain it as best I can. So, on the edge of Europe and thousands of miles from the United States, the relevance of Ukraine extends far beyond its borders. First and foremost, a Russian invasion would upend the lives of 44 million Ukrainians. That's a lot of people. But its fate has huge implications for the rest of Europe, the health of the global economy, and the global economy is just how money works throughout the world. And most countries are interested in money, imports, exports, things like that. And Ukraine is important there, so it would hurt the health of the global economy, making it less healthy. But I'm guessing for Russia, they see it as it'd be better for them. And also, it would have implications about America's place in the world, or the United States' place in the world. So it increased fears over the security of other former Soviet countries in Eastern Europe. It would heighten fears over the strength of the post-1989 international order and America's ability to influence it. And it would risk raising fuel prices across the world. And fuel prices are already very high. But that's why we're trying to move into a more sustainable, non-fossil fuel energy source, like the sun. Electricity isn't the best because coal is non-renewable either, but we do need to move away from gas. But solar, hydrogen, there are these. Anyway, so here's how the Ukraine ended up at the center of a global crisis. So why do Russia, US, and Europe care so much about the Ukraine? So why? Why is this happening? Both Russia and the West see the Ukraine as a potential buffer against each other. So they're just kind of sitting there in the middle between kind of the West, which is west of Russia, which Russia's huge, by the way, huge. But I mean, places like England or France, which are kind of west. And of course, the United States. Russia considers the Ukraine within its natural sphere of influence. Most of it was for centuries part of the Russian Empire. Many Ukrainians are native Russian speakers, and the country was part of the Soviet Union until winning independence in 1991, when I was still in high school. So for me, that's not that long ago. And so, honestly, it's about 30 years of independence, which isn't a long time for a country. Russia was unnerved when an uprising in 2014 replaced Ukraine's Russia-friendly president with an unequivocally Western-facing government. Means favoring more the U.S., NATO, things like that. Most former Soviet republics and allies in Europe have already joined the European Union or NATO. Jumped ahead. Ukraine's lurch away from Russian influence felt like final death knell for Russian power in Eastern Europe. So to Europe and the United States, Ukraine matters in part because they see it as a bellwether for their own influence and for Russian intentions in the rest of Europe. Basically, since we're friends with the Ukraine, and it is so close to Russia, and they do have a lot of information about Russia, it helps with intelligence when it comes to the U.S. So, but it receives considerable financial and military support from Europe and the United States. If Russia invades the Ukraine, I suggest Moscow might feel empowered to raise tensions with other former Soviet republics that are now members of the Western Alliance, like Estonia, Latvia, and Venezuela. So the thing going on right now is the Ukraine's kind of a stepping stone towards moving into, I wouldn't call it a world war, but a lot of countries in the world would be involved if Russia decided to step in the way that it seems like they might. So any Russian incursion would also further threaten American dominance over world affairs. By winning the Cold War, the United States established great influence over the international order. And that was way back in, like the 80s and before the 80s, when the Cold War was like, the U.S. and Russia were keeping each other in check, but it was like a democracy versus communism for a long time. But that influence has waned or lessened in the past decade, and a Russian invasion might accelerate that process. So by reinvigorating NATO, the United States may help to slow that process down or even reverse it. Okay, and so now we're moving on, just some of the history. So the Ukraine was often in the news during the Trump administration. Why? Why was that? Well, the Ukraine was central to the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump in 2020. Several months before impeachment proceedings, Mr. Trump had blocked $391 million in military aid to the Ukraine. Soon after, Mr. Trump asked the newly elected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate discredited corruption allegations involving now President Joe Biden, and at the time the likeliest Democratic challenger to Donald Trump. As a result, Mr. Trump, it says here, was accused of illegally asking a foreign entity, the Ukraine, to intervene in the American political system, of changing the state policy to help him personally. The impeachment vote narrowly failed. So that's kind of why it was in the news. So you got Trump, you got the president there of the Ukraine. So the Ukraine was also at the heart of a scandal involving Mr. Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. In 2018, Mr. Manafort was jailed for concealing more than $30 million worth of consultancy fees he received from Ukrainian oligarchs, so just people high up in the Ukrainian, kind of political system and government officials to promote The political fortunes of Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian Ukrainian president, ousted in the 2014 uprising. So Mr. Manafort, who was working for Donald Trump, advised Mr. Yanukovych, who was a guy who was pro-Russia, pro-Putin. So advised him, this is what Manafort did, between 2006 and 2014, before the latter fled to Russia and before Mr. Manafort began working for Mr. Trump. Okay, so next part. So that's part of it. So, we've had some dealings with the Ukraine that weren't the best. Where we were, it did seem like using Ukraine to kind of side with Russia to gain influence some way that way. But then didn't Russia already invade parts of the Ukraine? So yes, Russia has invaded parts of the Ukraine. After the uprising in 2014, troops wearing unmarked uniforms invaded Crimea, a strategically important peninsula on the Black Sea. In a referendum condemned as illegal by most of the world, the region then voted by an overwhelming majority to join Russia. Later in 2014, pro-Russian separatists, backed by Russian troops and military hardware, captured parts of eastern Ukraine, setting up two rebel republics in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions that remain unrecognized by any other state. Does that mean to this day? I guess so. So this has happened before. There are pro-Russia areas of the Ukraine. Overall, not all the way. So fighting continues today between the Ukrainian state and the separatists. To many Ukrainians, the threat of a broader Russian intervention in Ukraine is therefore merely the latest episode of an unfinished 8-year war. And that war is likely to continue whether Russia invades in the coming days or not. So this has been going on for a while. It's just it's escalated to the point where we need to kind of step in. What do the Ukrainians want, though? So the threat of another Russian invasion has consolidated a growing sense of national pride and unity among Ukrainians, even among those who grew up speaking Russian. So as recently as 2001, opinion polls suggested that roughly half of Ukrainians supported the country's departure from the Soviet Union, so half the people don't want Russia to be there. And today, more than 80% support Ukraine's independence, and more than half back joining NATO. So it does seem like the majority of Ukrainians definitely do not want Russia to be, they want to be their own sovereign nation. Though anxiety courses through the country, life continues more or less as normal in most of it. So as much as there are a bunch of troops surrounding, life is going on as is for now. Both civilians and government leaders say that they remain calm amid foreign reports of imminent invasion, and some say that they doubt Russia will actually invade. But at the same time, many civilians have increasingly joined volunteer defense units and signed up for first aid courses. So here's a picture, a lot of Ukrainians are saying, hey, I'm going to help out to keep us sovereign and free. We like where we are, and we don't want it to change. We don't want Russian influence. And so they're ready, if anything does happen, to be able to help out any way they can. So how might Ukraine and its supporters stop another Russian invasion? Can the Ukrainians really help? They're not as powerful, but they are a determined people. So Ukraine could promise to abandon any effort to join NATO or carry out a never enforced pair of peace agreements signed in 2014 and 2015 that were considered favorable to Russia. Under the agreements, known as the Minsk Accords, the two separatist territories would rejoin Ukraine, but only in a federal system that could give the territories a veto over Ukrainian foreign policy. So it's kind of a divided country. So there are parts that do support Russia, and they want to be able to not so much secede, but still have Russian influence. But the Ukrainian government's hands are tied, at least in the short term. Abandoning NATO aspirations would contravene the Ukrainian constitution. So that they don't want to do that. And a poll in December found that 3/4 of Ukrainians either entirely reject carrying out the Minsk Accords or want them amended. And remember, amendments, just like to our constitution, is you say, hey, okay, well, this part's good, this part's good, this part's good, but we got to do something about these other parts. That's the good. Let's fix that, you know? Especially in hindsight, you're like, yeah, no, it kind of worked out for that time. Not really working out now. So the United States and Europe have more cards up their sleeve. Washington can cut off Russia's largest financial institutions from the global financial system, crippling the Russian economy. So that would be devastating to Russia if the U.S. decided, hey, if you're not going to back off, you're not going to have much money left. Like trade and everything, you're going to be your own country. We're not going to be trading with you, and you're going to have to work with that. Germany could halt the implementation of Nord Stream 2, a major new pipeline transporting Russian gas to Europe. And the United Kingdom may place restrictions on Russian oligarchs with property and assets in Britain. So there's a lot of people joining forces, NATO forces, saying, hey, there's a lot of things that could happen if you decide to invade a country that doesn't want to be invaded. And then there's the diplomatic path. The Kremlin insists that the crisis is not just about Ukraine, but about the NATO military presence in Eastern Europe, which President Vladimir Putin of Russia describes as an existential threat to Russia's security. So Putin wants NATO to pull back from the region and guarantee that neither Ukraine nor any other countries there will ever join the alliance. Now, President Biden insists that the United States is ready to keep talking, but that will remain committed to the idea that every country should be free to choose its own alliances. And it's true. If I want to side with you, I can side with you. If I don't want to side with you, I don't have to side with you. And the U.S. has done this for a long time. We've also forced our way into a lot of places and been like, yeah, you better join us, or we'll just invade. We have invaded a lot of countries. To help out, is what we say. So I can kind of see where certain countries might find this hypocritical. But then again, here it is, the heads of the Ukraine asking for help. Why is the Ukraine so vulnerable? Though given money and arms by the West, the Ukraine is not actually a NATO member, and so cannot count on the direct military support of the United States and its allies. Its military, though, is a recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars in Western aid in recent years, is still no match for Russia's. So we do fund their military and help, but Russia has much more money and military power than the Ukraine. It is also surrounded by Russian allies and proxies, and by Russia itself. So Russian troops are massed not only along Ukraine's eastern border, but with Russia, but also along the Belarusian border, just over 50 miles north of Kyiv, it's spelled different, and the Ukrainian capital. So, Russian troops are also stationed in Transnistria, a small and unrecognized breakaway region from Moldova to the Ukraine's west. If Russian troops invaded from some of or all of those locations, Ukraine's army might be stretched too thin to mount an effective defense. So, again, Russia has a much bigger army. So, as much as we can help and Ukraine's fighting its own battle, it's still Russia, if they decide to invade, they have a lot more troops when it comes to that, and money. So would-be allies like Germany may also be wary of enacting economic measures to deter Russia. Europe is highly dependent on Russian fuel, and Russia is a major trading partner of Germany. So, there's that. That Russia is very important. We live here in the West, way across the ocean. We have lots of ties to a lot of different places. But a lot of people do depend on a lot of things that come out of Russia. So that's something to keep in mind. So, and finally, the last two. What are the possible economic effects of an invasion? So some of the world's main grain supplies are routed through the Black Sea, which borders both Russia and the Ukraine, two major wheat producers. Military action could disrupt both grain production and distribution, raising food costs for consumers all over the world. So Russian supplies about a third of Europe's gas, much of which is currently shipped through the Ukraine. So any disruption at either end of that supply chain would force European countries to look elsewhere for fuel, most likely raising world oil prices. Again, things are already very expensive. So, those are some of the economic impacts. So, is an invasion certain? Is it going to happen? For sure. Is Russia going to invade the Ukraine? It looks like it. Everything's set up. According to this, which is Time Magazine, not necessarily. The United States and other countries say an invasion is possible within days and have evacuated staff from the Ukrainian capital in preparation. But Ukraine and the United States could still take measures to placate Russia, and Russia may still avoid an invasion. The economic damage of Western sanctions and the potential toll of an extended war with Ukraine might be too great a cost for Moscow to stomach. So, this is how it's unfolding. Everything is still up in the air. It doesn't seem like it's much. It doesn't seem like it's a world war sort of thing. It seems more like it's going to be diplomatic, and people are going to, well, have to pay more at the pumps. Russia's gonna be cut off a little bit for a little while, probably, if they choose to invade. So there's a lot of things out there, kind of floating around. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. It's good to keep up with the news. If any of you know any more about this, please let me know. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please ask, as always. And whatever answers you're looking for, I will do my best to find. And yeah, we can kind of follow this together if that's what people want. But that's what's going on right now. So this has been a little bit of a current events class. All right. I'll see you all later.